It began on a morning that no one paid any attention to, just another day in the reserve, where golden rays of sunlight pierced the dense canopy and the air smelled of earth and moisture. Ranger Elias had walked these trails hundreds of times, but on this day, something eerie hung in the air. The jungle was too silent. No bird call, no rustling, not even the distant trumpeting of the elephant herd. Only a strange, deep hum, like a silent thought before awakening. Nature seemed to be holding its breath, as if preparing for something great, something inevitable. Elias stopped at the southern edge, where the swampy terrain began. And out of the thicket moved a massive figure, broad, heavy, yet graceful. It was Mala, the old elephant cow Elias had known for years. Once rescued as an orphan calf, she was now the silent matriarch of this region. But today, something was wrong. Mala seemed restless, pawing the ground with her front legs, her ears twitching nervously. No loud trumpeting, just a deep, throaty sound that shook Elias to his bones. Then she turned abruptly and stomped back into the jungle. Elias didn't hesitate for a second. He dropped his backpack and followed her. Mala moved with astonishing speed, almost forcing him to run. Branches slapped him in the face, the light dance flickering between the leaves. The ground became muddier, the jungle denser. Sweat dripped from his forehead, his breathing became labored. Then, as if out of nowhere, Mala stopped, motionless in a small clearing. Elias stepped cautiously beside her and froze. A young bull elephant lay there, half submerged in the mud, his massive body trembling weakly. One of his front feet was caught in a rusty wire loop. The metal had dug deep into the flesh. The wound was swollen, infected, and buzzing with flies. The ground was soaked with blood. The bull laboriously lifted his head, his eyes dull, filled with pain. Mala moved slowly toward him, extended her trunk, and gently touched his cheek. Not like a stranger, but like a mother who had found a long-lost child. Elias caught his breath. He reached for the radio. "Injured elephant," he whispered into the microphone. "Urgent assistance needed. Deep cut, heavy bleeding. Bring the kit, everyone, to the station," Elias shouted into the radio. While the team prepared, Mala stayed with the injured bull. She didn't leave his side, standing still, breathing calmly, occasionally gently touching him with her trunk. Elias watched as the young elephant's breathing slowly calmed, shallow but more regular. It was hard to comprehend. Two giants of their world, one wounded, the other protective. Elias wondered what this connection was. Was Mala remembering something from her past? Or was it just an ancient maternal instinct? When the rescue team finally arrived, every minute counted. Elias prepared the sedative while two rangers carefully positioned bolt cutters. The wire loop had dug deep into the leg, through skin, tendons, almost to the bone. Mala backed away, but only a few meters. She observed every detail, her gaze alert, almost worried. Elias wondered again, how had she ever found him? Why hadn't she simply turned away, as many wild animals would? What drove her to return here of all places? The first cut through the metal caused a dry crunch. Every millimeter was precarious. Finally, the noose gave way, slowly but surely. The moment it was completely removed, fresh blood spurted from the wound. The veterinarian was on hand, immediately rinsing with an antiseptic solution and injecting antibiotics. An experienced ranger bandaged the leg with calm, firm movements. Mala stood at the edge of the clearing the entire time, calm but not indifferent. Her body almost instinctively shielded the injured animal from the sun and insects. When the young elephant flinched briefly, Mala let out a low, humming sound, gentle, soothing, almost comforting. Elias was deeply touched. He had seen many things, but this was different. This wasn't an animal reaction. It was compassion, unmistakable and deep. Finally, the young elephant was loaded onto a stretcher and lifted into the waiting transport vehicle. Mala stayed close by, moving slowly with the vehicle, as if protecting the transport. Back at the station, the bull was taken to a secluded recovery enclosure, lined with soft straw shaded by tarpaulins. The team worked in shifts, monitoring his vital signs, administering pain medication, and regularly cleaning the wound. And yet he remained remarkably calm. Even when he briefly regained consciousness, there was no trumpeting, no rearing up, because Mala was there. The elephant cow hadn't left him. She stood now outside the enclosure, her trunk stretched through the bars, calm, watchful, like a protective shadow. Hour after hour passed. At some point, Elias sat down on the ground next to her. Together, they gazed at the injured elephant in silence. No words were necessary. The next morning, something rarely felt spread through the reserve. The story spread slowly. A drone had accidentally captured the moment Mala approached the injured bull. The video was forwarded, first to biologists, then to journalists. Inquiries piled up. Media outlets wanted interviews. But Elias remained silent. He knew this wasn't a story for quick headlines or viral clicks. It was something bigger. Something you had to feel before you understood it. The young elephant was now stable. His vital signs had improved, but he was weak, exhausted, and barely moving. He drank small amounts of water and some fruit, slowly, with a shaky trunk. His gaze was often blank, but never panicked, never aggressive. And every time a wave of pain swept through his body, he instinctively turned his head to the side, to where Mala stood. Always by the fence, always alert, always there. The old elephant cow had become a constant. Every morning she appeared before sunrise, sat beside the fence with her legs tucked under her, and stayed there for hours. She didn't just observe, she watched. She seemed to know that her presence healed more than any medication. Elias had begun taking notes, not for an official report, but out of an inner need. His gut feeling told him that something was happening here that went far beyond what we thought we knew about animal behavior. In the stifling midday heat, when even the insects stood still, Mala didn't move an inch. Only her eyes, those deep, wise eyes, followed the young elephant's every move. On the third day it happened. The bull rose for the first time, slowly, trembling, his breath drawn in pain, but with a clarity in his gaze that took Elias's breath away. He hobbled to the edge of the enclosure, to the fence, and lowered his massive head directly onto the spot where Mala sat. And Mala? She didn't move. But then she raised her trunk, heavy, steady, and placed it against the bars, just centimeters away from the injured bull. It wasn't a gesture of power, not dominance. It was gentle, almost reverent. The young elephant closed its eyes. Not a sound, not a fear, not a hiss. Elias stood silently beside it, the veterinarians holding their breath. No one said anything. No one dared. Because it was a moment of truth, a bond that couldn't be measured or explained. No ethogram could capture it. No behavioral research could describe it. There was memory, recognition, something old rising from the depths of her past, something that nature had perhaps never intended, and yet had happened. And yet, now it lay before Elias, unmistakable, like a memory that had lain in the shadows for too long. That same night, he rummaged through old station files. Something haunted him. The neck collar of the young bull elephant was old, almost worn through, but still legible. The ID was unambiguous. An orphaned young bull brought to the station over a year ago, barely 2 years old at the time. According to the report, he lived in the northern care enclosure at the time, directly adjacent to the area where Mala was housed. The notes spoke of playful interactions through the fence. Elias remembered now a curious elephant calf and a gentle old cow that handed him leaves with her trunk and sprayed him with water. At the time, the team had laughed at these interactions. A touching episode, they thought. Nothing more than a freak of nature. But what if there was more? What if there, in those innocent moments, a bond was formed, not just out of curiosity, but out of deep affection? Perhaps that young elephant had seen in Mala the mother he never had. Perhaps Mala, in all her wisdom, had recognized something humans couldn't see. Elias leaned back in his chair. The realization hit him like an electric shock. The young elephant hadn't returned by chance. Wounded, disoriented, in dire need, he had sought the only place he associated with security, the only being who had ever looked at him with true compassion. Mala. The next morning, a rumbling trumpeting broke the silence. Deep, piercing, almost like a warning cry. Elias jumped, leaped out of his tent, and ran to the enclosure. The young elephant stood erect. His ears moved alertly, his gaze clear. ready. Mala also stood erect, her massive body tensed, her nostrils flared. Something was different. Even the birds were silent. The light had turned pale, as if the sky itself had held its breath. The air was heavy, oppressive. Then the radio crackled. Tracks west of the south gate. Possible poachers. Armed. Elias's heart rate increased. The station immediately went into action. Rangers reached for their weapons. Warning signals went off. But Mala didn't move. She stood by the fence, unperturbed. And inside in the enclosure stood the young elephant, still injured but no longer weak. Upright, alert, ready. Their eyes met, and it was as if the wilderness itself spoke, not with words, but with a silence that said everything. Nature had written a new code, an unwritten law beyond our definitions, and these two beings, Mala and the young bull elephant, were its witnesses. Two figures suddenly moved from the thicket behind the fence. Men, dirt-stained clothes, heavy boots, rifles in hand, not rangers, not researchers. Elias called out to them, raised his hands, but it was too late. One of the men raised his rifle. Then everything happened simultaneously. Mala let out a trumpeting cry so powerful it shook the ground. She slammed into the fence, her trunk raised, her eyes fiercely determined. The shot rang out. It hit the metal mesh, sparks flying. The poachers hesitated, staggered back. Then movement erupted from the forest. 3 more elephants stepped forward. Mala had summoned them without anyone noticing. Young, half-grown, powerful animals that she had once taken under her care. They charged forward with furious trumpeting, their movements swift and purposeful, like defenders of an invisible boundary that must not be crossed. The men recognized their superior numbers and ran. The forest swallowed them. Elias, the young elephant, and Mala remained behind. Slowly she approached the enclosure again. The bull moved toward her. He pressed his forehead against the bars. Mala did the same, her massive head resting on the same spot. No words, no sound, only silence. Two beings, separated by steel, united in spirit. Not as mother and child, not as guardian and ward, but as allies in a world that had long since forgotten this, the language of compassion. But the story wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next day, the sanctuary was no longer just a remote wilderness spot. The news had spread like wildfire. A drone footage and a short clip from the surveillance camera had been posted online by a young ranger. And now millions of people saw an old female elephant defending an injured male elephant against armed men. It was more than a curiosity. It was an event that touched something deep within, a connection that transcended all species barriers. A reminder of what was once taken for granted and what now shone like a lost treasure in this story. The headlines blazed, the secret bond of the wild, Mala and the king, female elephant, male elephant, and the power of compassion. Reporters called, scientists begged for access. Behavioral scientists wanted to analyze every detail. But Elias blocked it. It was still too early, too sensitive. What was happening here couldn't be easily measured. It couldn't be counted. It couldn't be categorized. What happened here, you had to feel it. The mind couldn't quite grasp it, and yet it was there, impossible to miss. The young elephant was slowly recovering. His leg was still weak, his steps unsteady, but he ate more, slept more deeply, and never showed signs of aggression. Whenever Mala was nearby, his heart rate dropped. His breathing became calmer, more regular. The head veterinarian, an experienced man with decades of wildlife care, admitted he had never seen anything like it. Not even among members of his own species was such a bond common. Mala, however, showed no exhaustion, no sign of disinterest. Every morning she appeared at her place outside the enclosure before sunrise. She accepted no food, barely moved. Sometimes she stretched her trunk through the bars as the young bull approached, cautiously, almost reverently. And sometimes she just stood there like a silent shadow of the past, like a guardian from another world that had never stopped feeling. During these days, Elias sifted through countless old recordings, archived material from the first weeks after Mala arrived at the station as a young cow. And then he found it. A clip, barely 10 seconds long. A small bull elephant, barely knee-high, pushes his tiny trunk through the bars. On the other side, a young mala. Curious, alert, playful, she flicked her trunk against the fence. The elephant calf responded, also with a cheeky nudge. Back then, everyone had laughed about it. A sweet encounter, a footnote in the station's everyday life. Now no one was laughing anymore. Now they understood. Perhaps that had been the beginning of everything. A forgotten moment that had faded in human minds, but had survived in the hearts of two beings and awoke again. On the seventh night, the young elephant got up, this time differently. Not laboriously, not groping, but with a new certainty. He walked slowly to the barred wall. There where Mala was waiting. He rubbed his head against the bars, not like someone seeking orientation, but like someone who finally knows where he belongs again. He pressed his powerful body against the fence, as if he wanted to end the separation, as if he wanted to force closeness. Mala slowly stretched her trunk through the gap. No sound, no movement, just contact. A simple, pure moment. But that was enough. It was enough to maintain the trust. The bond remained, tender but unshakable. But Mala felt a stirring of unease. Elias was the first to notice. The old elephant was no longer quite so still. Her breathing was faster. She raised her head more often, swiveled her ears, glanced into the forest. It was as if she sensed something, as if something was about to happen. A change, a decision. Elias knew. A direction had to be found soon. The tension was visible to the naked eye. The moment when the past had to let go to make way for the future was approaching. Mala felt it, and the young bull felt it too. Should the young elephant be kept in captivity? Should he be housed permanently in a secure enclosure, away from danger, but also away from Mala? Or should he be released? But how do you restore freedom to an animal that has bonded to another living being? To a female elephant who was more than just its fellow elephant? How do you expose it to a world where such bonds are rare or even non-existent? The answers weren't in any manual. The team's discussions dragged on for days. It was no longer just about medical questions, but about ethics, instinct, and what lay beyond pure biology. But Elias had long known they couldn't just leave him behind fences, not after everything that had happened, not if they didn't want to desecrate this history. The next morning, Elias appeared before the steering committee. He had reports, video footage, observations, and a plan. Not a standard enclosure. No attempt at separation, but a new space, a hybrid zone, a large, naturally designed area at the edge of the reserve, separated from civilization, but open for a shared life, a place where both could move freely, at their own pace, at their own tempo. There were objections, safety concerns, doubts. But in the end, Elias's argument was irrefutable. The animals had long since made their decision. Now it was up to the humans not to stand in their way. It was a matter of respect towards something greater than control or science. It was nature. The morning of the release was quiet. No media frenzy, no cameras. Only Elias, a veterinarian, and 3 rangers stood at the edge of the new zone. The key to the gate lay heavy in Elias's hand. The young bull elephant stood ready, his coat shone again. The wound had healed. He limped slightly, but his steps were powerful. Dignified, Mala was already waiting under an old acacia tree, motionless but alert. When Elias opened the gate, the elephant stepped out. Not hastily, not hesitantly, with firm intention. He sniffed the air, then he moved directly toward Mala. No trumpeting, no hissing, just one quiet step at a time. And then, a gentle gesture. He pressed his head against her flank. Mala swung her trunk slightly and gently laid it on his back. For a moment, the world was silent, and everyone standing there knew. Nature had spoken, not with words, but with a feeling that needs no language, but changes everything. The weeks following the release changed everything. The hybrid zone evolved into a living symbol of a new coexistence. Mala and the young bull moved through the grounds with the calm of 2 old souls. Sometimes they rested together under the shade of the trees. Sometimes they drifted apart, only to reunite later. Their behavior followed no pattern, no formula, no expectation, only a single law, connection. not united by a human plan, but by a natural balance that no one had foreseen. Scientists observed, took notes, debated, but no formula, no theory, no ethogram table could explain what was happening. Elias wasn't blinded by data. It had long been clear to him. What was happening here wasn't created for analysis, but for reverence. It was as if an ancient memory of the wilderness had opened up, and no one knew how long it would reveal itself or when it might disappear again. The world outside the reserve also took part. Donations poured in, conservation organizations praised the project, activists called for its expansion. Even the usually critical voices of skeptics fell silent, because images can't lie when they touch the heart. And yet, Elias deliberately kept the public at a distance, not out of mistrust, out of respect. Some stories are too precious to be dissected in press conferences and interviews. They don't want to be explained, they want to be lived. Elias wrote notes every night, not for reports, for himself, for what his mind couldn't grasp, but his heart could understand. The connection between Mala and the young bull elephant deepened. One evening, Elias watched the bull sit down next to Mala. His powerful forehead leaned against her shoulder. Mala didn't move. She just stood there and looked into the distance. And Elias knew. In that moment, something happened that transcended all known rules of animal observation. It wasn't behavior, it was a relationship, a silent agreement, grown from memory, loyalty, and something no scientist could ever measure. Then the rain came. For weeks, the skies had been silent. Now they opened. The hybrid zone transformed into soft, muddy terrain. The terrain became difficult to walk on. Many animals retreated, but Mala and the young elephant stayed together. As always, they didn't suffer from the wetness. On the contrary, it seemed as if they found strength in it, in the reflective puddles, their closeness, in the hanging drops on the foliage, their trust. A new silence had descended, not threatening, but reverent. But then a new sign. One morning, a ranger discovered fresh prints near the northern border. Poachers. An alarm was immediately raised. Security cameras were checked. Fences were reinforced. The ground was checked, but Elias wasn't the first to react. Mala. She positioned herself between the dark forest and the young bull, her trunk raised, her posture alert. Then she let out a deep, warning trumpet, a sound that went right through her bones. The young elephant stepped to her side, shoulder to shoulder, two silhouettes in the first light of dawn. Still, ready, an image forever etched in her memory. But the attack didn't come. Instead, a decision came. The reserve's board met again, this time with Elias, veterinarians, behavioral biologists, and ethicists. Should the project be expanded, include other animals, or should it be left as it was, raw, untouched, authentic? Elias spoke last. He showed no charts, no PowerPoint slides, no predictions for the future. He simply recounted what he had seen. Two beings, separated by evolution, by species boundaries, by millennia of separation, connected by memory. A story no human could have invented. And in the end, Elias said only one sentence. We haven't created anything here. We've discovered. And what you discover, you don't destroy. The decision was made. No changes, no expansions. The hybrid zone remained as it was, wild, unattended, but full of dignity. Elias breathed a sigh of relief. In the weeks that followed, something like normality returned. Mala and the young bull elephant lived as they had chosen for themselves. Independent, but never truly separate, like two sides of the same story. Their paths crossed often, not a sound, no coercion, just a glance, and everything was said. Trust, in its purest form, was evident in every movement. And then, one evening, as the sun fell through the treetops like liquid gold, it happened. The young elephant stood up, slowly, but with a firm step. He went to Mala, who was resting beneath a fig tree, her powerful body still, her eyes closed. Without a sound, he lowered his head and gently touched her forehead with his trunk. Mala opened her eyes. She raised her trunk and stroked his shoulder. It was a farewell, but not a sad one. It was like quietly turning a chapter. The next morning, they were both gone. No traces, no prints, no clues. The cameras showed only trees in the wind, and Elias knew they were gone. Where to? No one knew. Why? It didn't matter. What mattered was only one thing. They were free, and they were free together. Perhaps they had found a new territory. Perhaps they had just moved a hill, or perhaps the wilderness itself had taken them in, as part of it, no longer separate. The world asked, searched, speculated, but Elias never answered. There was only one picture hanging in his office, a young elephant and an old cow, side by side in the shade of a tree. Below it, handwritten in fading ink, some stories never end. They return to the silence from which they came, and somewhere deep in the forest, the wind still whispers of an elephant and a cow who found each other when no one believed such a thing was possible.